In an era of evolving threats, protecting our nation demands experts who can innovate at the intersection of intelligence, automation, and human insight. For 80 years, SRI has built advanced systems in partnership with federal agencies, the Department of Defense, DARPA, and branches of our military to deliver cutting-edge technologies that protect us. SRI has pioneered human-centered AI, advanced sensing and tracking, created mixed reality systems for simulation and training, and built predictive cybersecurity platforms. Today, developing dual-use technologies is critical. Technologies that are being used in the commercial world are being used to protect us. From the very start, SRI considers dual-use capabilities, delivers science to people, and bridges the gap between defense and commercial applications. Radar systems that penetrate the Earth's surface, space sensors that detect and track the smallest of particles, optics, materials, sensors, solid-state devices, medical applications using quantum technology, technologies on autonomous platforms operating in harsh environments, from extreme heat to below freezing, AI systems that anticipate and develop safeguards against attacks before they happen, aircraft and ground survivability technologies that protect our military. We deploy deep technology in partnership with our ecosystem of entrepreneurs, corporate partners, and funders. SRI turns science into solutions.
So welcome, everybody. We're very happy to have everybody here tonight for this PARC Forum. It is a very exciting event. I'm sure everybody will be just thrilled to participate in the panel or participate and hear the panel going forward. I am Jim Fritz. I'm Senior Vice President of Strategic Development and Communications for SRI. And tonight our topic is obviously the future of defense technologies. This is a very relevant topic to SRI. If you go back to the early days of SRI, about 35% of the global funding on R&D was provided by the U.S. around defense technologies. Right now, that's about 3%. So that landscape has changed significantly over the years, and SRI, as a federal contractor working in the defense space, has had to adapt to that. So we're very excited to have the panelists tonight, and we'd like to thank them for coming. I'd also like to offer a special thanks to the Naval Postgraduate School Foundation, who is our co-sponsor for the event tonight. I know some folks were able to tour their facilities yesterday, and I heard that went very well, so thank you to them for all they're doing, and thank you, obviously, to the speakers for being here. We're also honored to have David Motley here today. David is the chairman of the SRI Board of Directors and was in town for a board meeting this week and was able to come and stay for this session, so we're very happy here as well. We have a very rich conversation today. It will be moderated by John Markoff, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of several books, and we're very lucky he's moderated these discussions in the past, and it's always an exciting job that we're excited to have John come and do that. We do, if anybody is here that would like to sponsor or from an organization would like to sponsor future events, please reach out to us. We love working with folks to put these together, and we'd love to have the opportunity to work with you. Just a couple housekeeping things before we get going. We will be taking questions from the audience, but we do that via these via note cards. So those will be coming around. They will be collected and will be transmitted to the panel. There is also on these cards a survey to help us celebrate SRI's 80th anniversary. We will be publishing the results of the survey on our LinkedIn page, so you can see what people think are the most important innovations of the past that SRI contributed to, and then what will be the most important innovations of the future that SRI can contribute to. At the end of the event, we will have a reception in the cafe. So you go back up the stairs to the left, and I believe all of our panelists will be there as well for some refreshments and some conversation. If there is an emergency, we need to exit. You go out the same way you come in through the back doors. Also, I'd like to mention the doors will be locked here after we leave. So if you have anything with you, please make sure you take it with you because these doors will be locked. You won't be able to get back in after the reception. With that, I would like to welcome to the stage Dr. David PARC, who joined SRI in 2021. He has spent his career leading research organizations, including United Technologies Research Center and the Georgia Tech Research Institute. We're very happy and proud that David is our CEO, and he's going to share a few words about SRI with a focus on some of the work we've been doing in defense and defense innovation. So David, over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Want to add my welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. This is an exciting year for us. We celebrate our 80th birthday. So we started in 46 as part of Stanford Research Institute, spun out in the 70s. And then in 87, we had the pleasure of having RCA Sarnoff Labs join and become part of SRI. And just a few years ago, 23 PARC become part of SRI. And so very much why we're here today. I know there's been a lot of excitement and discussion about AI, about the intersection of Silicon Valley and defense tech and the things we need to do, whereas in the past we relied on defense technology to spill out into the commercial world and benefit society in that dual-use way. Now it's spinning the other way around, and really key for us, and our panelists will speak about that. What you may not realize is this is not something new for SRI. Our AI Center was started 60 years ago and was the foundation for agentic systems. The second director of AI Center basically laid the foundation for that. Niels Nielsen later went to Stanford. Also, the world's first mobile robot, Shaky the mobile robot, on which a lot of the planning algorithms are that basically guide mapping and things of that fashion, came from there. And then a ton of things we're working today with regard to quantum sensing, but also things related to space, cybersecurity in space, networks, things of that fashion. And in fact, one of our company spin-outs, Leo Labs, actually maps what you saw there before, everything flying around in low Earth orbit. I've been here since 21, as Jim mentioned, and every day I learned something new that I didn't know before. I was meeting one of our DARPA colleagues who's an economist and said, you know, I didn't realize till I came here that SRI was foundational in the formation of the SWIFT banking network. And so many things that we each touch every day grew from the innovators that are at this place and their passion, not only around health and security, education, but very much around national security, keeping our country safe. And it's been part of what we've done for a long time and continue to do. So I'm delighted to have our panelists here. I know they'll be introducing themselves, but Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis, thank you for joining us. Raj, Christopher, thank you. And I almost feel like John Markoff's part of the family now because he's been wonderful in helping us with this. And in fact, you might see the article he wrote for the New York Times about PARC becoming part of SRI. And I tell John every day, are we living up to that vision that we espoused in that article that you wrote? So no further ado, let me turn it over to John to introduce our panel, and you all will enjoy. Please give them a round welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. This is a complete Back to the Future moment for me. I showed up as a young reporter in 1977 to write about the way microelectronics was transforming modern warfare and surveillance technologies. And I did that for 3 or 4 years, and then we had the Reagan defense buildup. And it was just much more fun to write about personal computing than it was to write about the dark side. So I sort of slid away and then actually it was here in 1980 where I saw an Alto, a prototype personal computer. And if you see an Alto in that period of time, it changes your world forever, which was what happened to me. You know, historically, the Valley has been entwined with the Pentagon since before it was the Valley. You know, I think you probably know that Fairchild's first customer when it was selling transistors, Fairchild Semiconductor, was IBM Federal Systems Division. Their first integrated circuits were sold to the Air Force Minuteman missile program and then to the Apollo program for guidance and navigation. Most people have probably, I mean, David mentioned briefly about SRI being spun off. I think it was actually thrown off is probably the better way of describing it. There was an intense anti-war movement on campus and the students were uncomfortable with classified research, and so SRI International was born. So there's this tension that's historical too. I thought today we could start, I mean, I'm hoping this is California-centric, Silicon Valley-centric, that we focus on sort of this new defense economy. Maybe we shouldn't use the word defense. I think that might be the appropriate word these days. We can talk about that. But I thought I could initially ask the Lieutenant Governor about how you see the military component of the state's economy. It's clearly changed. What is it like today?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I'm Eleni Kounalakis. I'm the 50th Lieutenant Governor of the state of California. I served in the Obama administration as a United States ambassador to Hungary. I traveled to Afghanistan twice in that capacity. And then before that, I was in housing. So a little bit of variety in my past. But I'm so honored to be invited, particularly because we have some real subject matter experts here. What I guess, say top line about California and the defense economy is that it's obviously a very significant part of the California economy and has been for a long time. We estimate that it makes up about 5% of the California economy altogether. But it's integrated into so many other elements of technology and manufacturing, and so altogether it's just a bigger component. Of course, started with the primes, and now, as we're seeing, these startups like Anduril and Skydio and so many others that are just exploding right here in California. So it's very exciting.
Are they, do you engage with the defense contractors directly as Lieutenant Governor? Are you working with them? Are you working for them? Are you in Washington at all?
So the federal government issues the contracts. A lot of activity that happens on our bases or at Vandenberg, we don't really have a great amount of visibility on. But I can tell you I'm California's representative for international affairs and trade. We have delegations from around the world coming all the time. And very often they're coming here to surveil or to visit and to assess whether or not they should be investing in these new systems. And so some of what I learned about what's happening here is talking to members of the Danish government that were coming to look to see whether or not they should be investing in these systems. So certainly, with an economy of almost $4 trillion economy that we are, there is a lot happening in California. So maybe it's a little bit my own bias having been a U.S. ambassador, but just by way of comparison, the first time I went to Afghanistan, the U.S. Army was really proud of the MRAPs. Remember that? Like that was sort of the cutting edge of technology. These vehicles that could roll over a mine and withstand it. So what is happening now is just such a wholesale change in the nature of warfare that, for me anyway, I think it's extremely interesting. So I think there are other maybe elected officials who share that, maybe more on the local level if it's happening in your backyard, like in San Diego or in Silicon Valley. But I suspect that it is going to be more visible in the coming years, and you will find that there will be more elected officials who want to come and visit and see what's going on here.
Well, let's talk about the coming years. So the Reagan defense buildup, the largest annual increase was 25%. If the Trump administration has its way, we're talking about a 50% annual increase, $500 billion. What kind of an impact would that have on the state of California?
Well, again, even if it's 5% of the economy, it's a huge impact, not just on the sector itself. I think I just read Anduril just signed a $20 billion contract. That's a lot of jobs. That's a lot of economic activity. But it's also the way that it's integrated with other technology companies that creates this ecosystem that keeps California very much on the forefront of all of these just new frontiers.
If there's a big Trump boom, who's going to benefit? Right now, defense spending in California is not equally distributed. There's a lot in Southern California. There's some in the Valley. There's some in the Central Valley. Who benefits from a big new infusion of?
Well, if you didn't know, the top 1% of taxpayers in the state of California fund half of our general fund. So overall, we are extremely reliant on, the unicorns that come out of nowhere and go public, on the individuals who profit enormously from the kind of investment that comes from the private sector as well. So it keeps our economy growing, again, from filling the coffers of the general fund to creating new jobs, cutting edge jobs for the 2.8 million students enrolled just in public higher education in the state of California. We all benefit.
Let's focus on innovation. I want to ask Raj, you as an investor, you've targeted dual use. Is that right? And does it work in practice? Are you able to find investments that play both ways?
Well, John, first off, thank you to you and Devin for having us here. It's so great to see the interest and energy in this topic. When Chris and I first were talking about this 10 years ago, we had to almost bribe people to come in to listen to us. So it's great to see the change. Maybe I'll talk about dual use and innovation, but maybe I'll piggyback a little bit on what the Lieutenant Governor said, which is what makes California special. There are nonstop delegations of visitors from around the world, from around the country, say, how do we build a Silicon Valley, right? How do we build that culture? And it's really about a culture that accepts risk, right? It's okay to fail here. In fact, if you start a company and you fail, you're more likely to get funded the second time around as long as you learn something from it. On the East Coast of the US, you might not ever get funding again. In Europe, you may owe a lot of money to the government, and in Russia, you might go to jail, right? So how do you bottle that, right? So you got one, this appetite for risk, and the other is just this concentration of talent. Because ultimately, and I'll answer your question around dual use, it's capital flows to talent. And in this geographic 30-mile square radius, you have some of the best universities doing research. You've got the investors that will provide the capital. You've got engineers. You've got senior management that can help you grow. And then, of course, the customers. And it's all here. And so that's what really makes it magical and I think hard to replicate. And the Valley has evolved in terms of what the focus of those technologies and customers are, right? So it started, as you noted, with a heavy focus on national security, right? Solving radar systems in World War II is many of the originations of the research here in the Valley, and missiles and satellites. And then it went very much consumer, your iPhone and photo sharing apps. And now I think there's a welcome return to, as I say, technologies of consequence, right? That are important for life and death decisions and particularly for protection. And so the number of engineers and companies that are building solutions that serve both government customers and commercial customers, it's absolutely enormous. And so this idea of being able to invest in companies that do both, or even just sell primarily to government, is a relatively new phenomenon here.
Where did, so you guys came, what was it, 2015 that you guys showed up with DIU? And I guess it was partially about changing the way the Pentagon did business. That was sort of but it was also about finding new ways to innovate for the military. If you take it all the way back, there was this golden era in the 1960s where ARPA funding created most of 4 or 5 generations of consumer products. And then in the early 1970s, maybe late 1960s, there were 2 Mansfield amendments. And the funding that came from ARPA and ONR became very targeted. You couldn't do blue sky research. And there are some who argue that that actually ended a golden era, that you might be able to do fine in creating military weapons, but it might not create the kind of innovation that sparked things like iPhones and personal computers. Is this current wave, I mean, sort of, if you look at the 3 stages, there was the end of the Cold War, and there was this contraction. And then more recently, with DIU, there was this significant, there were 2 forms of expansion. There was the 9/11, post 9/11 led to a big expansion. But then in 2015, there was this second turn of the Valley toward military applications. Is there meaningful innovation that comes out of that kind of spending, or is it, just more people at the trough?
So, John, Raj and I had the privilege of working at the hip of Secretary Ash Carter, Deloitte Ash Carter. And there are some people you meet who are once in a generation thinkers, and Ash was that. And, to give him credit, in 2001, he wrote a paper called Keeping America's Technological Edge.
Right.
And he was a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School, and he noticed that R&D budgets after the Cold War were flatlining at the same time that the commercial economy, particularly in California, was taking off. And so he foresaw a future in the very near term in which the Department of Defense, rather than having defense labs like DARPA that were producing things like the internet and stealth technology, would all of a sudden be dwarfed by the kind of innovation happening in private industry. And just to put a number on, in 2016, when Raj and I came out here, Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, their market capitalization alone, each of them, was bigger than all of the defense primes combined. And so Defense Innovation Unit was in essence Ash Carter's way of solving the problem. We have these two locuses of innovation. How do we bring them closer together now that the commercial locus of innovation is so much larger than the defense specific?
So I've heard that the toughest thing about DIU was the last mile problem of, you could develop all kinds of interesting stuff, but how do you get it into the field? Did you guys get over that challenge? Is that, first of all, fair? Was that the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge, you could call it last mile, or you could call it just the ability to buy at a timeline that's relevant for a startup, right? Most startups, they are venture backed. They have to show certain milestones to raise more money, to stay alive. That time cycle is 18 to 24 months. If the procurement cycle is 4 to 8 years, you're never going to sell to that government. And so again, I think what's changed today and why you see all these companies that the Lieutenant Governor discussed come about is two changes. One is some of the philosophical issues that some engineers had has dissipated. Post-Ukraine invasion, post-Israel, people realize, if you're a student of history, humanity's not been one that always leads to peace, and you need to have defense, and it became visceral. Second, if you want to build a company, you have to be able to create profit and value. And it was too hard to sell to government historically. And that is what I'm proud that DIU and a few other organizations under Carter and then Jim Ash's leadership made it easier. So you could make money and do something that helped protect society. And now you just see this massive flow of capital and startups focused on the space.
I want to ask you guys about the way warfare is going to look in the future and the way the military is going to change to sort of be part of that. But I also want to ask the audience to think about questions, because I have to admit, I'm a bit of a Rip Van Winkle here. I began, so my first reporting on AI was actually at SRI in 1980. A guy named Gary Hendricks showed me a speech recognition system that was had been commissioned by the Office of Naval Research. They recognized 4 words. And then,
Sounds about like Siri today.
which also came from SRI. 2004, the DARPA started the Grand Challenges, and I, was deeply involved in reporting on that. It was really a remarkable period that had, look at the robots all around us. So that came directly out of it in some ways. But I retired in 2017, which makes me a Rip Van Winkle, and I've missed 3 or 4 generations of this stuff coming into the world. But let me start by asking you guys about the changes that are going to come as a result of this wave of technology flowing into the military. And I want to ask you about the compression of time and what that means about the nature of warfare and human decisions and things like that. This is at the heart of the problem that a lot of,
Sure, yeah, sure. And I think what makes it different today is that we can all watch these changes ourselves, right? The Ukraine wars and now what's happening in Iran, it's on social media. We see what the advent of low-cost drones will do. We have these low-cost and ubiquitous satellites are giving us access. We're seeing how artificial algorithms are making decisions. So, as much as I would love a horde of MiGs to come over the horizon, they call me to go shoot them down, like that those days are changed, right? Focus on keyboards. It is $10,000 drones attacking critical infrastructure. And to your point, John, what's different is like the pace of change. So if you look at the last 4 years of the Ukrainian conflict, the way they were utilizing drones 4 years ago it's totally changed till today, right? The Ukrainians are a nation without a navy and without a long-range air force. They sunk the Black Fleet and they destroyed strategic bombers as far as Siberia. Like these are changes that we need to here in the U.S. and with our allies adapt to and have reasonable solutions that again are cost effective.
So I guess, isn't it said that America always fights the last war? And isn't it true that now the Ukraine-Russian war is the last war? I mean, I'm sort of trying to see what's happening in the Gulf and it looks, to me, as a layperson, it looks like 2 wars ago, actually, in some ways. I mean, a couple of questions. Is it possible to win wars without deploying soldiers? Can you win wars with air power?
Actually, I don't think you even know this. I wrote my senior thesis on this exact question in undergrad. And I studied World War II, Yamamoto to Milosevic at the time. And my analysis was, ultimately, warfare and territory, these are human conditions. And it takes boots on the ground to affect regime change. Milosevic capitulated because we had Apaches and air cav ready to go at the border. So, maybe things are different, but historically it's been very hard to do that.
Yeah. Just give.
Well, I'd just say that, if I were to put my national security strategist hat back on, we are living in a very unnerving time where the proliferation of global hardware around the globe, right, gives many people access to the same technologies. And, Eleni is definitely served in places far away that have a very different value system than we do. And all of these countries now have access to the same technology, which means I think if we want to be able to comfortably exist as a democracy with our democratic allies, we are going to have to get very shrewd about how we use technology to defend ourselves. And I think, that technology is going to probably look very different than the technology we deploy today. There's a joke in military strategist circles that right now the United States Navy has 2 kinds of ships. They have submarines and they have targets. And I mean, it's kind of a joke, but actually it's not a joke at all.
Yeah.
And so this points to the kind of uncomfortable realities that either we adapt to quickly in order to preserve our values, our freedom of action that we've historically enjoyed, to let this amazing society we live in blossom, or we don't pay attention to that and we get ourselves behind the power curve.
Yeah.
And that's not good.
Eleni, in your experience as an ambassador and being in a situation which was, I guess you could say, not democratic, are there takeaways that you can apply to, I mean, at the state level, does the state have responsibilities with respect to national security that come into play here and sort of protecting our democratic traditions?
Well, I think that as I'm listening to the 2 of them talking and just imagining what else they're thinking about when they think about the future and where all of this is going, I guess I try to take the perspective of the average Californian who is unnerved. But I think that there is on some level a hopefulness that mutually assured destruction is still somewhere in the equation, and that those who are out there who are developing these new capabilities, they are also developing ways to protect against those new capabilities. I know that's part of what's going on in California, and that, if it keeps changing this fast, I don't know how, you have to imagine that maybe it's going to settle somewhere, and that if it settles in a place where our country has the capability of dominating, but also the ability to defend. And other countries have similar level of capabilities that we can get to some kind of a static point again, where people can just eat their Cheerios and not worry about what's happening. But I think that you know, the old ways of doing things as it relates to California, we have, I don't know, 160,000 active duty officers who are here. We have 1.5 to 2 million veterans. And so I also find some kind of solace that when you talk about the talent pool, that it includes people who have this kind of experience. So I'm not really answering your question, because you talk about being Rip Van Winkle, you know, so much power over the future is truly being held in the hands of the people who are innovating. Again, both the weapons, but the defenses against those weapons. So the government in Washington is making all kinds of decisions for us in you know, attacking Iran, and you know, and it adds another layer of concern that that they're wielding these very weapons maybe without thinking about what the long-term consequences are going to be. But the old world just isn't.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned mutually assured destruction, because you know, the signature program of the Reagan administration was the Strategic Defense Initiative. And here we are at PARC, which created an organization called the Computer Professionals for Social Responsibility, which was one of the most sort of active groups opposing SDI. Their argument was that SDI was not going to make us safer; it was going to put us at more risk. And now we have the Golden Dome, which I think would be a tremendous economic boom for the California, and particularly. But I wonder if you guys do you have enough knowledge about what Golden Dome might be, where it is, and do you think it's worth building?
I'll step in and say that, you know, look, AI is phenomenally scary in terms of what it can do, particularly when watched to autonomous weapons platforms. But you know, unlike nuclear, it's a very diffuse technology. It truly is a general purpose technology, which means that us and our adversaries and everyone else around the globe is going to have access to top-end AI at about the same time. So I don't see AI suddenly creating such a disequilibria in global power that we're going to, you know, all of a sudden tip into some sort of an accidental war. But you know, at the same time, as military history has shown, we are now in a race for adoption. And as you all know, you know, if you were to use the AI of today, you know, as you're, you know, typing in your question into the chat window versus the AI of 6 months ago, the AI of today is so much more powerful. So the question, I think, for us in terms of global stability is, can we deploy AI that will be just a bit ahead of all our adversaries? And if we can, that actually may be a sufficient deterrent to conflict, actually, that in a paradoxical way, AI, this powerful new technology could make us safer, actually.
I'll answer your question directly on this Golden Dome. Look, at the end of the day, I think the American people and people around the world, they want to be able to go about their lives every day and not worry about something from the sky hitting them, right? Go to the baseball game and enjoy it with their families. And I think for the observers of Iran and Ukraine conflicts, these small drones are now very diffuse. They're not very expensive. The control mechanisms, like the AI that runs it, also is diffuse. And so taking a serious approach to defend against those, which Golden Dome is purported to do, I think it would be foolhardy not to do something like that, right?
Let me step back just a second and ask, what's the consensus now on drone warfare? Does it favor offense or defense? Is there a...
I mean, all technologies can be used in offensive and defensive means, and it's this cat and mouse game that's going there. But the one thing I will note, and you've seen it in the current conflicts, it's always a balance, right? So drones aren't going to eliminate everything, and the whole world just goes to drones, and we don't need longer range aircraft or ships. We've seen their effectiveness now. So we always need a mix. And even as I think about, Pentagon budgets, you talked about the growth, as an investor out here in the Valley in these companies, I care more about the mix. So what percentage is going to go to these more modern technologies? And the Reagan Institute just did some analysis that says of the current budget, 0.8% goes to what we would call new entrants into this, right? Modern technology. 75% of that funds goes to 3 companies: Palantir, SpaceX, Anduril. So everybody else is getting that little piece. And so if we really believe drones and AI and whatever other technology is the future, I would argue the mix needs to change. Maybe we do 2%, 10%.
And does that get at this neoprime versus prime dichotomy? Could you explain what the neoprime, I mean, you sort of did.
I think, look, you're seeing neoprime, I don't know who came up with that name, but basically a startup that is scaled, right? So it's not just 10 people in a garage, and they're now competing for real contracts and putting pressure on maybe the traditional suppliers, right? What's happened is, in the Reagan era, as you described, we had 100 different suppliers of defense equipment. We had a competition, people innovated for a host of reasons to draw down the peace dividend post-Cold War. That went down to 5. And historically, all of those companies also supported the commercial side, right? So IBM sold mainframes both commercially and to the military. Now those 5 basically only sell to government. And so the divergence in technology was wide, where a soldier would be using their iPhone in the barracks, and then they walk into work, and it's like walking into the 1980s, right? Where everything is Windows XP or older. And so I think part of all of this is you have to understand at the end of the day, our men and women in uniform are very innovative, and they're going to do the best they can with whatever kit we give them, even if it's substandard. So we owe them to go through all the bureaucratic mess to get them stuff that's cutting edge.
And John, if I could just brag with Eleni about another California innovation. We had this 29-year-old staffer named Lauren Daly at Defense Innovation Unit. And the first week that Raj and I arrived on the job, she said, "Hey, I just found this single sentence in the National Defense Authorization Act that I think is going to allow us to make contracting a much easier. Out is going to be 18 months under the federal acquisition rules. In is going to be a 4 to 6 weeks straightforward, get the startups on contract, no barriers, right?" And we did that. And Ash Carter in 2 weeks made that, department policy. And, to the credit, the current administration, Secretary Hegseth, in November, made the Defense Innovation Unit way of rapid contracting the default contracting for the entire Department of Defense. And since Raj and I were working at DIU, the department has bought now more than, 100 billion or so worth of technology through this portal. And this is crucial because this way of buying technology truly is a level playing field. It doesn't matter the proposal writing you have, how many lobbyists you have. It's your technology versus somebody else's. And this is an example of our system winning. Of the best competitor, the best startup, the best tech company, the best technology winning for the benefit of the nation. And it's reforms like this that really, really, really matter.
Okay. We're starting to get questions, but both I want to get in. I mean, there's 2 areas I'd like to pursue. And one of them is, let's talk about it through the quarrel between Anthropic and OpenAI and Emil Michael or Hegseth or whoever. Can you guys explain to us what happened?
I mean, you work for an AI company now.
Yeah, dear. Well, look, I was office roommates with Emil Michael in the Pentagon, and I respect his tenacity. I think it's very healthy to have a Silicon Valley executive in a high position in the Pentagon who comes from a commercial technology innovation rather than a defense prime innovation. But I think it's also important that, AI talent is a rare thing, and I think our nation will be the better for it if we keep those people leading at the edge of AI focused on how to contribute to our security rather than being worried about how they contribute to our security.
What do you think about the red lines? Were they wrong to draw them? Surveillance and mass surveillance and lethal autonomous weapons. What do you think about that?
So, I mean, I echo Chris's comment that, more is better. These large language models are phenomenal to improve military capacity. And at least from my, public policy major background, it looks like every 3 months a different one is better. And so to have a single source of models, I think, is a disservice again to the folks in uniform. So more is better, and I'm optimistic and hopeful that
We'll get to more.
this squabble gets figured out and we get it, folks get access to everything. I think in terms of those red lines, again, I don't know the details, but these are policies that the Pentagon has long held to, right? Which is autonomous weapons will always have some human in the loop at a decision process for the ultimate choice of taking life. The question is, where does that human sit, right? We already have some weapons that will go to a certain target area and find the target on its own based on what we say is acceptable. Some humans hit the launch button. So there's always going to be a human. I think it's where, and traditionally the department doesn't do domestic surveillance. So again, none of those seem controversial, at least when I read the open press. OpenAI has similar things. So again, I think this comes down to trust in people.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time reporting on a defense directive called 3000.09, which was the human in the loop directive. It's not clear that it's operational in the Pentagon. It was updated today under the current regime. It was updated in 2023. They took the phrase human operator and took the word human out of the word operator, but they added what I think is fascinating, this question of governability. What essentially is they added the necessity that the kill switches be there. And I didn't really understand that until I began to spend more time looking at how language models are behaving, and they're not determinate. They tend to do things that are unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
So where does, my sense is that at this point, these systems, neural net-based systems, are just doing targeting. They're not being used to control weapon systems.
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but I guess what I would say is that to point to your point of how fast this technology is moving, right? We're all here in California, and most of you hopefully have taken a Waymo, right? 4 years ago, would you just sit back and have a car totally drive you? Now I find a Waymo safer than a human driver, right? And it is a non-deterministic AI model, and it's working. So at some point, these technologies will get there. So I think that's a little bit of a red herring in terms of the problem set. The problem is where do we want to put the human in that decision, and at what scale will we let these systems make their own decisions?
Do you think that, given your point or my point or your point about time compression, that's going to be realistic?
John, look, Eleni would probably agree on this as well. Like, when we get into Waymo, we want it to be able to safely take us home. And if the Waymo encounters a situation that it doesn't understand, that could be dangerous, maybe too many emergency vehicles, something else, we want it to stop and pull off to the side of the road. And this is all about test and evaluation of AI systems and understanding the bounds upon which AI systems work. Where is the uncertainty? Where does the uncertainty verge into operational risk and dangerousness? And so, test and evaluation historically on military hardware is a one-time thing. Look, Raj he flies F-16s. He does it to this day. So an F-16 is certified as an airplane to be safe to fly, right? AI is completely different. It's constantly changing. The models are updating every day. So testing and evaluation becomes a much more fundamental challenge. And this speaks actually to an enormous, not only organizational change the Department of Defense is going to have to undergo, right? Making test and evaluation for AI and software systems very different than for military hardware. But actually, it also provides to an opportunity for California companies that can bring their own capabilities to making us see more clearly the operational limits and strengths of systems that will be more and more deployed.
So
Yeah.
one of the things that, one of the reasons I wanted to be here, like most of you, I wanted to listen to these guys. So, but I think it's really interesting that the private sector venture capital is going into startup companies in the defense space. I don't recall any time when it's ever really been quite like this. You know, we're used to sort of the behemoth of DOD, you know, the federal government doing these big contracts. And now there's all this nimble money going into startup companies. Along with, I'll put a little plug for California, we have, again, not for obviously the big ones we're talking about, but for those smaller ones, we have something called Cal Competes. Maybe you've heard of it. This year, $900 million was made available for companies that applied to try to get this funding. A lot of the criteria have to do with creating jobs, good paying jobs, that sort of thing. But that's substantial for a small company with an idea. So suddenly we're seeing whether it's California tax credit dollars or a Cal Competes program, whether it's private sector money, there are all of these new companies and it's all moving so quickly. How do you begin to bring in the ethical question of, yeah, but is it safe? Is it, you know, the kind of company that over time will actually make us safer and not be, you know, have responsible for human rights violations? But I want to go back to the question you asked of what I learned in Hungary. Viktor Orban made all the decisions about everything. He made a decision before, in the first time that he was in office, to buy the Gripen program, the Swedish fighter jet program, instead of the F-16 program, because he was annoyed by some of his underlings thinking that they were the ones who made the decision for him. So when I look, and the things I worry about with this government in the United States right now, is if they make decisions about where to invest, right? Whether it's a decision between Anthropic or one of the other LLMs, or whether it's the difference between Fury and some other model based on maybe one of the family members having an interest in it, that worries me more, because then you know, we're not honoring, I think, what the United States is really known for, which is being able to be on the cutting edge of everything we do. Those kinds of decisions that get made when there is too much power concentrated in too few hands, that can be a source of folly, both in potentially making us less safe, but also, you know, because they're the kinds of equipment that we shouldn't be moving toward for the safety and security of the world. But also it might just be bad investments because somebody who's a friend of theirs is getting some kind of a kickback.
Thoughts?
Well, I think in the acquisition process, right, having people that understand the technology is important. So this is why getting folks from the Valley to go in and work in government, work in uniform, and giving context as to like which model works, which evolutions are going to come faster. I think that's really an important part of making sure we get to the right decisions and having a testing and evaluation, you know, regime. You know, what's also interesting though, per both your points, is that, you know, we are seeing a lot of venture interest in these companies. Because again, you know, venture capitalists are in the business of creating returns for their investors and the pension funds, whatnot, and they see a real opportunity, right? They're seeing changes in how governments are buying, recognition of how technology is coming, and in, you know, all things in the Valley, sometimes there's some irrational exuberance, but it will, you know, I think in broad strokes, having more capital supporting these type of technologies is a really good thing.
I've seen a couple of people call the current American excursion in Iran the first AI war. Do you think that's fair?
Oh, I think the Ukrainians
Are way ahead of us?
that title. Yeah.
Yeah. So one more difficult question. The attack on the girls' school in Iran. There's not a clear answer yet about why it was. Do you guys have a sense of why that happened? Was it, I mean, I actually particularly want to ask you because you're involved with data sets. And was it, I mean, that one of the possibilities was that somebody fed the system old data?
Look, I, for 3.5 years of my life, was the senior civilian advisor, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, working on behalf of thousands of military professionals on the Joint Staff to try and make sure our military is as effective as it possibly can be as it carries out the orders of our civilian leaders. And I, along with the rest of us, obviously, have been following this very, very closely. It seems like there was a high likelihood that a mistake was made based on the available evidence. And it just reminds all of us that if we are going to use force, we should do so as carefully as we absolutely can. War is a novel thing. It should always be a last resort.
Yeah, I mean, it's messy. War is messy. The fog of war is a reality. And in any human thing, there will be some mistakes that happen. I guess what I would say, based on my having been on, the pointy end as well as the policy side, if you look at our senior military leaders, the 3 and 4 stars, their civilian staff, I think the level of ethics and caring and professionalism, it's just not in doubt, right? Mistakes will still happen, and ultimately the answers will come out, which I think makes the American military force different.
Unique. There are some good audience questions, and to your point, Lieutenant Governor, what do we need to do to retain talent in the U.S. Even with the current funding cuts? There clearly seems to be a brain drain, or the danger of brain drain. Do you see it already?
Oh, definitely. I think we should all be doing everything we can to raise our voices with the federal government that immigration into the United States, of which California has been the single largest beneficiary, is what has made this country great. It's where we are, though.
Yeah. If we can still call the top 1% of the smartest people in the world and get them to come live here and move with their families, it's great for a nation. I think 50% of the stars, 40% are either immigrants or kids of immigrants. So that's one of, America's a nice place to live. Yeah. California's a nice place to live. We have a strategic advantage.
What kind of R&D funding does the state of California have planned for civilian dual use for tech, since federal funding today is a bit of a rolling roller coaster?
So there are a couple of things I mentioned. Cal competes, again, $900 million in a year. This is not enough for but it's certainly, if you're a small company, it could make the difference between getting off the ground. And then we have tax credit programs. They tend to come and go depending on whether or not there's money in the budget for them. So that's uncertainty has been a problem, but billions of dollars in tax credit programs have been awarded in the past. And then the other thing, I sit on the board of the University of California, and watching the federal government pulling back on grant programs is really upsetting. There's an effort to put a bond on the ballot to be able to backfill some of the money that's being stripped away from research from our universities. I think it's folly. I think most of us would agree, but again, we have the federal government that we have, and they're stopping immigrants and they're slashing research funding. So we have some mechanisms here in the state, but you can't make up for the federal government's investment.
No. We haven't spoken about China. We probably should. This is a question. In World War II, commercial industry was instrumental in winning the war, as chronicled in the book Freedom is Force. With China providing the largest manufacturing capacity in the world, does that pose an existential risk to the West? And if so, what is our national security or national economic counter strategy? Dr. Mark Mayberry.
I mean, yes. We need to bring industrial production and manufacturing back to the United States. And you're starting to see small efforts of that. We've got a couple of fabs, right, that have come together. I saw Jeff Bezos announced some $100 billion investment program. So I think more of these things, the better, and also to have the talent, the skill base, right? So the trades that can operate these machines is vital.
Your point on fabs. I mean, the Biden administration tried hard, didn't make much progress. Doesn't look like the Trump administration is heading in the same direction even. I mean, I'm worried about any significant portion of semiconductor manufacturing coming back to America, and it seems like it's a tremendous risk in terms of competing with China. Am I wrong?
It's a challenge, and we need to figure it out, right? We need to figure out how to do it here, how to put it with our allies in Asia, so we have an alternative source and can't have 95% of them on one island.
Yeah. Industrial base, thoughts on?
Look, Mark Milley, one of the last chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of America, made a very profound point, which is that we are all 3 generations away now from the last time there was an actual great power conflict on this planet in the Second World War, and that in that conflict, tens of millions of people perished, and it was heinous. And we should not let that historical amnesia avert our vision from the greatest good that we could achieve, right? Which is going to be maintaining a set of peaceful relations between 2 global superpowers, the US and the Chinese, even though there are different value systems at play. And I think that's something that we should all think more about.
Yeah. You called out a part of the Valley's culture about risk-taking, which I think is really at the heart of a lot of this stuff. Here's a question that relates to that. Commercial innovations in Silicon Valley is based on a world-leading model on how to manage innovation. Has the defense industry learned to copy that model? Let's just talk about risk-taking. Do you think you're seeing that injected into this new defense world?
I think we are. I think you're seeing some courageous leadership from folks in the Pentagon, uniformed services, new civilians. I think it's actually been a pretty bipartisan change. If you look at this defense reform, probably started by Carter, now continued from every administration since, it's just picking up speed. You've got Congress behind it. So in some, yes. The question is just degree and scale. Are we going there fast enough?
Yeah. Now we're getting into the world of acronyms, and I'm lost. How has DIO shortened the acquisition process? PEO can still only purchase where requirements exist. How are startups shortening the requirements process to get to acquisition? Do you guys understand that?
Sure. So I'll take a stab at that acronym suit. Look, the current team in the Pentagon, led by Hegseth, really has moved the marker on defense reform, and they've done it actually in close consultation with bipartisan support from Congress. And they've said a couple of things. They said, one, if you're going to buy software, you've got to buy it the DIU way. You've got to buy it through an honest competition where you're solving a problem, and how many lobbyists you have doesn't matter. And then in November, they made that the default condition for acquisition of the department. And then in January, the Congress of the United States of America, based on a bipartisan consensus, passed that into law, which frankly brings a little bit of California and our ethic of free competition into a place in Washington that has not had free competition in defense for a very long time.
So this is the California question. I think is probably, it's bubbled up a little bit. What can California do to build factories in California? Every investor encourages R&D in Silicon Valley, but larger factories elsewhere, we used to build everything here. Is manufacturing ever going to come back to California?
Having several companies now where initial manufacturing has been in California, but we've had to go out of the state. It's just too expensive.
Yeah.
We are #1 in manufacturing in the country, but that is really because of the scale of how big we are.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that? I'm kind of surprised actually to hear that.
Yeah. No, 40% of all the containerized shipping into the United States comes through Long Beach and LA. We have one of the busiest borders in the world between California and Mexico. Cars are moving back and forth every day, a piece here, a piece there. components coming in through Long Beach, making its way into the Inland Empire where there's manufacturing and warehousing. But to your point, we do see a lot of this sort of initial manufacturing, and then, Rivian is a really good example. They're, again, not in defense, but something I know. They have all of their R&D here in California. They paint the color of the Rivian cars in what they call California colors. I just love that detail. But they build the cars up in the Midwest somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's cost and, and I think for some entrepreneurs, what I've heard is they feel a little bit under attack.
Yeah.
They're feeling under attack for being successful and for building a business.
So it's such a tension. I mean, I've heard so many people complain about regulatory constraints, and yet, when I first showed up here, I could drive up to Skyline and look down at this intense yellow haze. I once had someone take me to a trailer park in Sunnyvale and wave a ketone stick in the air and it changed color. I'm glad there are certain regulations. So the question is, which ones do you keep and which ones do you get rid of?
Well, I don't know if it's, I'm not smart to speak on the environmental regulation side of things, but I think, encouraging and welcoming entrepreneurship, capitalism, it's been the history of California, since the gold rush. But I think sometimes, these folks get pilloried and then they get welcomed by other states.
I mean, I'm trying to remodel my kitchen in San Francisco, and I'm quickly becoming a small government Democrat.
There's this abundance debate that's going on that you're part of.
And people are hearing it for what that's worth. I think that's why Daniel Lurie was elected. I think that's why the abundance movement is gaining so much interest out there. What's really important, though, is if companies are, and this is the first elected office I have held, so let me just say, I hope I can speak with some level of credibility as having been part of the regulated community for a long time. It's really important that the legislature, the governor, the administration know specifically where the hangups are, where the problems are. If it's cultural and people aren't felt welcome, we should be standing on the rooftop saying, we want business here, we welcome business here. Again, there's no uniform voice either, because I could say that the governor has said that, but then a guy, in a union can come and start collecting signatures for a billionaire's tax. So it's a big, loud place.
Yep.
But I do hope that on balance, companies do feel welcome enough here, and that's why, we're the fourth largest economy.
Well, I'm a California optimist. I mean, I live here. I want to be successful. So.
Yeah. So maybe a last question. We're at 6:09. We're a little bit over, but this is a hard question, but I think it's a real one, particularly given the political situation in America. How can we ensure defense technologies being developed to protect us won't be also used against us within our own society, e.g. surveillance, curtailing freedom of privacy, movement, and speech? I mean, it's a different kind of dual use question, right?
Well, I can start. Look, one of the really special responsibilities those of us here in California, particularly those of us that are actually involved in the building of technology, is to really think hard about its uses, both for good and otherwise. And it is incumbent upon us to raise our voices when we feel concern or worry, and to trust that in raising our concerns in our democratic society, we will be able to find a way forward. And so I am so proud of any tech firm, any engineer, any citizen of California that raises their voice out of concern about what they see, because that will only make us better and stronger and more true.
These are not new debates. We've had this debate when the phones, Alexander Bell made the phone. We're going to listen in on, the government's going to listen on a call. So every time there's some new technology, I think we need to have the national discourse, our elected officials leading that discourse with the American people. And that's what makes our system different. It's pretty messy, right? Maybe the least worst best system out there, but ultimately it eventually gets to the right answer.
Now, I would just say that as I think it's much more worrisome than the telephone, I will say, the world that we're living in today, with good reason. I think it's a parallel, but the scale is significant more, I think, for the rational person. But I also think that there's a little bit of people feeling that they can't do anything about it. There's a little bit of a feeling, I like to think, and I have two boys who are in their 20s, that you don't have to be afraid of the future, that it's coming in regardless. And so playing a part of the future, whether it's in one of these industries or whether it's in public policy, that's really the way forward if you're worried, is to be part of it. But I wouldn't understate that this, you know, I got to tell you, I think you guys got off easy in this conversation. I've been doing my homework a little bit, reading about hypersonic missiles, the Fury, an unmanned fighter plane, the ability, evidently, in how the United States was able to hide the attack on Khomeini and in that meeting, so that the monitors of Iran airspace, the Iranian military, did not know that the attack was happening until it happened because they couldn't see it. I think that this is a brave new world. It is also a space race, an arms race. And you guys are so much at the forefront of all this. So I'm not going to try to, I don't mean to take your job here, but I'd actually I'd just like to ask the two of you, and we'll start with you, Raj.
Okay.
Definitely start with him.
Single day, you're evaluating whether or not to invest in companies that are thinking outside of the box with now all of this other activity going on. Where do you see the future of warfare? Where is this all going to land? Which are the companies that are going to win?
You know, it's actually a privilege to get to meet all these young entrepreneurs that have high energy and going after trying to solve really exciting problems. So my job is to get to pick ones that I think are best and convince them to let me partner with them. So it's super exciting. And you know, I don't think we always know where it's going to go, but we know it's probably going to be more unmanned. It's going to be moving faster, and AI technologies are going to be involved. And I think, again, the way that you have to, at least for me, come back to and be excited about that is, one, you know, strong belief in you know, our democratic values, and ultimately, you know, the decisions of using force are done appropriately. And two, I'd rather those technologies and those talents be here than in an adversary that is not as open, and we can't have a public dialogue about it like we are today.
And then, Christopher, does the United States win this new arms race?
Look, Raj has served in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. I served as a civilian in Iraq. We've both given our professional life to preventing war. And I think that's what we're trying very hard to do here.
That's a good thing to do. I was going to mention the numbers. Maybe I should, just as a fitting. I brought the numbers. Let me find them. Hang on. So far, the Trump administration in its first year has been involved in 8 wars. I guess that's Yemen, Iran twice, Venezuela, Somalia, Syria, Nigeria, and some boats in the Caribbean. And just for comparison's sake, let's see, I think that's 3 more than Obama's entire, and I think it was 5 in the case of Biden. So we seem to be clearly moving in a particular direction. I don't know, that's what gave me pause. I mean, I grew up in a world where I thought America only fought just wars. That was part and parcel of my childhood. And now it seems like we're maybe in a different phase of the world.
Well, even before Trump, you know, I was a real estate developer and I became a United States ambassador. And I actually found very quickly that regardless of political party, the United States foreign policy is an America first policy when it comes to our national security. It is our #1 job to keep our people safe. And part of keeping our people safe is keeping stability in the world, because a more stable world is better for the United States. So whether or not you think it's a just war for building democracy or a just war because it's our job to keep stability and security and keep Americans safe, I think that we are the best actor out there and the most powerful actor out there. But again, it is, you know, I only spent a few days in Afghanistan in 2010 and again in 2012. But that is not the kind of war that you all are at the forefront of seeing with all this new technology.
Yeah. I guess what I would end with from my side is that, you know, we had a great privilege of this job, but our in government for 2 years. But our job was to, you know, fight with bureaucrats, which is just, I cannot tell you how painful the job that is. I don't wish I'm a worst enemy. And so when you're in the dumps, like, why am I here?
I'm sure there's any gray hair.
Wasting my life doing this. You know, I would go visit our men and women at a base or deployed somewhere. And I tell you, nothing energized you more when you'd see these kids. I mean, they're like early 20s who have dedicated a significant portion of their lives to go into harm's way and do a mission they really believe in a, you know, dark foreign area to give us, you know, security at home. And so I think if I end, that's like the bright light here, is that the number of our young men and women that want to go and serve, it's remarkable, and it's growing amongst technologists.
Thank all of you for your time. Join me in giving my hand.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Thanks.
Nice job.
So again, thank you so much to our speakers. I think in the last 15 minutes, it got really exciting. And I might comment sort of as they brought the topic there, because we're sitting here at SRI, that a lot of the models we have are wonderfully tuned to help us grow and win. And I think that was that wonderful conversation, you know, and we have certainly discussions about social networking and kids and things that fashion. And I think the thing that's important to remember is a lot of the systems we have incentives and tuning for a particular purpose that helps us as a society to preserve our security. I think within that ecosystem, and I say it because we're here at SRI today, there's an important role for the independent nonprofits that have a role in thinking about guardrails, assessment, test evaluations being said. And I think it's important that our whole ecosystem together, and that was some of the conversation about how we think about funding, philanthropy, and all these things, really help us as a society make sure that each of the parts and the components of society interact well together. So thank you very much. You'll get to see our guests upstairs in the reception.